In the dimly lit auction house on the outskirts of Montana, the air hung thick with the scent of dust and neglect. The murmur of indifferent voices, the scraping of chairs against the concrete floor, and the occasional sharp crack of a gavel created an unsettling symphony of apathy. At the center of it all lay a German shepherd, motionless on the cold, unforgiving ground. His once proud frame had withered into a gaunt shadow of its former self, ribs pressing against his dull, matted coat. Scars laced his body, silent testimonies to a past that had been anything but kind. His ears barely twitched at the sounds around him. He had long learned that reacting meant nothing but pain. "Not worth a dime," a man scoffed from the front row. "Damaged goods," another voice chimed in, followed by ripples of cruel laughter. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his voice betraying a hint of desperation. "Starting bid, $50. Silence. The pause stretched long enough for the whispers of disdain to weave through the crowd like a slow-moving tide. Then a chair scraped against the floor from the back row. A man, his face partly hidden in shadow, rose. He wasn't like the others. His stance was firm, his presence commanding yet distant, as if he were haunted by a battle that had never truly ended. A worn military jacket clung to his frame, frayed at the edges, bearing the weight of years of service. His voice cut through the murmur like a blade. Steady, certain. "I'll take him." The room fell silent. No one knew it yet, but in that moment, everything had changed. The truck rumbled down the long dirt road, headlights cutting through the thick Montana dusk. Inside, Gordon Hayes gripped the wheel, his calloused fingers tight around the worn leather. Beside him, the German shepherd lay still, its breath shallow, its body rigid as if bracing for another unseen attack. Gordon stole a glance at the animal, no, the soldier beside him. Scars mapped its lean frame, a cruel testament to a past filled with violence. The road to trust would be long. When they reached the ranch, Gordon killed the engine, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. He opened the passenger door, stepping out into the crisp night air, waiting. The dog didn't move. "Suit yourself," he muttered, making his way to the house. The soft creak of the wooden porch was the only sound. He left the door open, just in case. Minutes passed. Then, a shadow stirred. The shepherd hesitated at the edge of the truck, eyes scanning the dark like an old soldier checking for threats. Slowly, warily, it stepped down. Not trust, not yet, but a decision. It padded forward, stopping just short of the threshold. Inside, Gordon sank onto a worn-out chair, exhaustion pressing against him like an invisible weight. He knew that feeling all too well, the war that never really ended. Outside, the shepherd stood frozen, caught between fear and something unfamiliar. Then, with a slow exhale, the dog took a step forward, and another. The wooden floor creaked beneath its hesitant weight. Gordon didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched as the shepherd, for the first time in years, chose something other than survival. It chose the first step toward home. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Dr. Caroline Foster stepped out of her truck, a thick manila folder clutched in her hands. Gordon Hayes met her at the porch, his sharp eyes scanning her face before flicking to the folder. He already knew. Whatever was inside would change everything. She exhaled slowly, flipping through the pages. "His real name is Rex," she began, her voice measured. "He was assigned to a classified unit in Afghanistan, Special Operations." Gordon took the file, his hands steady despite the storm brewing inside him. The military reports were heavily redacted, entire sections blacked out. But the details that remained were enough. Rex had been deployed on multiple missions, his record decorated with commendations. And then, suddenly, silence. A 6-month gap in his file. No deployments, no medical records, just missing. "What happened to him?" Gordon asked, though part of him already knew. Caroline hesitated, then pulled out a final document. A scanned ID tag, embedded in Rex's skin and grown over with scar tissue, had been removed during a recent exam. One name was still visible, Handler, Major Jonathan Mercer. The name struck like a hammer. Gordon clenched his jaw. "Mercer ran the enhanced training program," he muttered, his voice laced with something dark. "I remember the rumors." Caroline nodded. "Those 6 months, Rex wasn't missing. He was being retrained, forced to undergo experiments in Mercer's program. They broke him down, tried to reprogram him into something more obedient. When he didn't conform, they discarded him." Gordon looked toward the shepherd lying in the distance, his gaze fixed on the horizon. the dog's scars suddenly told a much darker story. "He wasn't just abandoned," Gordon murmured. "They tried to erase him." The cold wind howled through the Montana night as Gordon Hayes paced the dimly lit barn, the weight of the file in his hands growing heavier by the second. Across from him, Dr. Caroline Foster and FBI agent Michael Reynolds stood near the workbench, their faces etched with concern. The evidence was undeniable. Rex had been a victim, not of war, but of the very system meant to protect him. And the man responsible, Major Jonathan Mercer, was still out there, operating in the shadows. Reynolds tapped the classified documents spread across the table. Mercer's program was designed to break these dogs, turn them into tools. When they resisted, they disappeared, officially labeled unstable, unfit for duty. He exhaled sharply. 43 dogs were euthanized in the past 3 years. Rex should have been number 44. Gordon clenched his fists, his pulse hammering. "Not on my watch." Caroline's voice was quiet but firm. "We need proof, Gordon. Enough to bring Mercer down for good." Gordon nodded, then turned to Rex, who lay near the barn door, ears twitching at the sound of his name. The shepherd lifted his head, his amber eyes sharp despite the past that haunted him. Reynolds studied the dog, then Gordon. "He remembers, doesn't he?" Gordon crouched beside Rex, running a hand over the scarred fur. "Every damn thing." He looked back up, his expression set like stone. "And so do I." The room fell silent, the weight of their mission settling between them. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about redemption. For a soldier, for a dog, and for every life Mercer had stolen. Gordon rose, meeting Reynolds' gaze. "Tell me what we need to do." The tension in the air was suffocating. The private training facility stood like a fortress under Montana's cold morning sky, its steel gates guarding the secrets buried within. Gordon Hayes adjusted his worn military jacket, his pulse steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Beside him, Rex stood poised, ears pricked, muscles coiled with anticipation. The German shepherd was no longer just a survivor. He was a soldier once more. Across the field, Major Jonathan Mercer took the stage, his polished demeanor a stark contrast to the monster he truly was. "Today," he announced, "you will witness the future of military canine training." His voice dripped with confidence, but the moment his eyes landed on Gordon, something flickered, recognition and fear. FBI agent Michael Reynolds moved first, stepping into view, his badge catching the light. "Major Mercer," he called, loud enough for the gathered audience of military officials and private contractors to hear. "Your program is officially under investigation." The murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mercer's jaw tightened. "This is a private demonstration. You have no authority." Gordon cut him off. "We have all the authority we need." He tossed a folder onto the table, evidence of Mercer's crimes. The documents spoke louder than any accusation. Classified reports, falsified records, medical exams of dogs who never made it out. Mercer's hand twitched toward his belt, toward a concealed weapon, but he never got the chance. Rex moved like lightning, intercepting before Mercer could even draw. The shepherd lunged, but not with blind rage. This was precision, controlled, disciplined. His jaws clamped down on Mercer's wrist, forcing the gun to clatter to the ground. The crowd gasped. Security rushed forward, but it was over. Reynolds signaled the agents waiting nearby. "Arrest him." As Mercer was led away in cuffs, Gordon knelt beside Rex, resting a hand on his back. "You did good, boy." For the first time in years, Rex stood tall, not as a victim, but as a warrior who had finally won his war. The acrid scent of smoke filled the air as flames licked hungrily at the wooden beams of the old training facility. Gordon Hayes barely registered the heat against his face. His focus was locked on the silhouette inside the inferno. Rex. The shepherd had darted into the collapsing structure without hesitation, disappearing into the thick haze. 2 young dogs had been trapped in their kennels, left behind in the chaos. Now, Gordon's heart pounded with every second that passed. A deafening crack split the night as part of the roof caved in. Sparks rained down like embers from hell, casting flickering shadows across the ground. "Rex?" Gordon shouted, his voice raw. No answer. His fists clenched. He was about to go in after him. Then, movement. Through the smoke, a dark shape emerged, staggering but determined. Rex, his coat singed and his breath ragged, guided the 2 trembling young shepherds toward the exit. The moment they reached safety, Rex collapsed onto the dirt, his body heaving. Gordon was at his side in an instant, dropping to his knees. "Stay with me, boy," he murmured, his voice barely more than a plea. Blood streaked Rex's leg where debris had caught him, and his breaths were labored, each one a struggle. Caroline Foster and her veterinary team rushed in, their faces grim. "We need to move him, now." Gordon didn't hesitate. He scooped Rex into his arms, ignoring the pain in his own body. "I've got you," he whispered. As sirens wailed in the distance, Rex's eyes fluttered open, finding Gordon's. Even through the pain, even through the exhaustion, there was trust. He had saved others. Now it was their turn to save him. The crisp Montana air carried the distant sound of barking as Gordon Hayes stood at the edge of the sprawling ranch, watching a new chapter unfold. The Second Chance Canine Rehabilitation Center, once just an idea, was now a thriving sanctuary for retired military dogs, those discarded, forgotten, or too broken to serve. And at the heart of it all stood Rex. The German Shepherd, now healed but forever marked by his past, moved with quiet authority among the other dogs. His presence commanded respect, not through dominance, but through understanding. He had been where they were, lost, afraid, uncertain. But now he was their guide. A new arrival hesitated near the fence, a Belgian Malinois with wary eyes and scars that told a story no different from Rex's. The dog flinched at the sound of a closing gate, instincts still tied to past trauma. Gordon watched as Rex approached, his movements slow, deliberate. The Malinois tensed, ears pinned back. Then Rex did something extraordinary. He lay down, making himself small, unthreatening. He waited. Seconds passed, then a minute. And finally, the Malinois took a tentative step forward. Gordon exhaled, feeling the weight of the past lift just a little more. He turned as Dr. Caroline Foster stepped up beside him. "He's doing your job for you," she mused, watching the exchange unfold. Gordon smirked. "He's better at it than I am." Behind them, the center buzzed with life. Veterans working with the dogs, finding healing together. The mission had evolved beyond rescuing these animals. It was about redemption, for all of them. Gordon looked down at Rex, who now stood beside him, his golden eyes steady. "We did good, boy." And for the first time in years, Gordon truly believed it. The sun dipped below the Montana horizon, casting long golden streaks across the ranch as Gordon Hayes sat on the worn wooden porch. Beside him, Rex lay stretched out, his steady breathing a quiet reminder of how far they had come. The old soldier ran a hand over the shepherd's thick coat, feeling the ridges of scars that would never fade. Some wounds never truly heal, but they don't have to define us. Gordon had spent years believing that broken things couldn't be fixed. War had taken pieces of him he could never get back, and Rex had nearly been lost to a system that failed to see his worth. But together, they had proven something different. Healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to move forward, scars and all. A gust of wind carried the distant laughter of veterans working with their dogs in the training yard. Each of them had their own battle to fight, their own ghosts to confront. Yet here, among those who understood, they were finding something beyond survival. They were finding purpose. Dr. Caroline Foster stepped onto the porch, a knowing smile on her face as she watched Gordon and Rex. "You ever think this is where you'd end up?" she asked. Gordon exhaled a quiet chuckle. "Not in a million years." He scratched behind Rex's ear, the shepherd's tail thumping lightly against the porch floor. "But maybe this was where I was always supposed to be." Rex lifted his head, meeting Gordon's gaze. In those golden eyes, there was no fear, no hesitation, only trust. Some stories aren't about victory or defeat. Some are about redemption, about finding the courage to rebuild. Gordon and Rex had saved each other, and in doing so, they had built something far greater than either of them had ever imagined.